Do you know how old the Louvre's oldest exhibit is? 9,000 years. And this object is not a modest shard, but a statue of a man over a meter high, one of the oldest sculpture ever found by archaeologists. How to imagine the 9 millennia that have passed since the creation of this figure? Baptized Russia is a little over 1,000 years old. Julius Caesar lived 2,000 years ago. Athens is 3,000 years old, and the Egyptian pyramids are 4,500 years old. And all this is only half the time path to the 7th millennium BC. Watch this video to the end. Hi friend, you're on the KirTop channel. Traces of pre-Columbian civilization in Guadeloupe. Specialists of the National Institute for Preventive Archaeological Research of France, during exploration work in the city of Abim, Guadeloupe, have discovered more than 100 graves of the pre-Columbian period. The archaeologists were invited by the local authorities. It is planned to build a residential complex on the site they surveyed. However, now the implementation of this project has become questionable since for the first time archaeologists have discovered a site with an unprecedentedly high concentration of traces of the pre-Columbian civilization. Archaeologists have unearthed several cultural layers. In the earliest of them, they found a large number of human remains buried in round pits as well as pits and pottery. According to scientists, these traces were left by the culture that lived here from the 11th to the 13th century AD. It is believed that the excavated buildings had an agricultural purpose. Sugarcane was probably cultivated in this area and sugar was produced. This is indicated by a large number of found vessels with the remains of molasses and molds for making sugar candies. A letter on a clay tablet. Scientists have found an unbaked clay tablet about 7,000 years old. It is covered with lines, according to archaeologists, which is a so-called prototype. This term was introduced into scientific circulation in the 1960s after the discovery in Romania of 3 similar tablets with mysterious signs. Experts decided that engravings on tablets could have served as a means of transmitting information in ancient times. It is not possible to decipher them, since they were created by people who did not know the alphabet. Scientists hope that artificial intelligence will help translate these messages in the future. Over the past 60 years, similar tablets have often been found on both sides of the Balkan Mountains. There is even a classification of such artifacts, the oldest of which is 8,000 years old. Most of the tablets are of the same elliptical shape. Some of them have images of animals, but in most cases, they are covered with simple lines and patterns. The grave of a giant was found in Egypt. A very interesting archaeological find was made in Egyptian Alexandria. Scientists have discovered there a huge black sarcophagus with the remains of a humanoid, which during life could boast a height of more than 2.5 meters. So here we are, dealing with a find that could potentially indicate the existence of giant humanoids known in the Bible as the Nephilim. According to archaeologists, this almost 3-meter sarcophagus dates from no later than the 3rd century BC, that is the so-called era of Ptolemy, which began after the death of Alexander the Great. The sarcophagus was found under a layer of earth of almost 5 meters and most likely had lain there for several thousand years. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities has already recognized the find as the largest sarcophagus ever discovered in Alexandria. In addition to the sarcophagus, there was also a huge bust of alabaster which probably depicts a deceased giant. This is not the only known case in history with the discovery of the Tomb of Giants in Alexandria. According to records, this is a king of the 2nd dynasty of Egypt who lived almost 3000 BC. It is true that his remains were never found, but according to records found by Flinders Petrie, Ches Chimui, measured about 5 cubits and 3 arms, which means he was 2.4 to 2.6 meters high. Place of the battle of the era of Ivan the Terrible. Russian archaeologists have identified the site where the Battle of Sadbishing between the Russian army and the Crimean horde took place in 1555. After reports of the discovery by the diving club of ancient objects at the bottom of the Gogol River, archaeologists surveyed the area where at least 300 different artifacts were found, including more numerous arrowheads and a coin from the time of Ivan the Terrible. They concluded that one of the final stages of the two-day battle took place here. The Battle of Destiny is one of the most famous battles in Russian history during the pre-Roman era. It took place on June 24-25 Old Style, 1555 in the vicinity of the Sadbyshi Tract on the territory of the modern Ural region between the Russian army of Ivan Sheremetyev and the Crimean horde of Khan Davlet Agray. Despite the numerical superiority on the part of the Tatars, the Russian army managed to retain its position and forced Davlet Agray to retreat in the steppe. According to historians, about 5,000 Russians and 15,000 Tatars died in the battle. This event became one of the important steps towards stopping the raids on Russian lands from the site of the wild field. Tisul Princess. We all read the tale of the Sleeping Beauty in childhood, but there is no smoke without fire because there are really many legends about the snow face. It is unlikely that they would have arisen out of the blue. The story of the Tisul Princess is a direct confirmation of this. A mysterious find in the Kemerovo region more than a half-century ago could have turned modern ideas about the origin of people. But until it received wide publicity in scientific circles, each of us decides for himself whether to believe in its truthfulness or not. In the fall of 1969, stripping works were carried out in a coal mine in the Tisulsky district of the Kemerovo region. Everything went according to plan until the workers saw a 2-meter marble sarcophagus in the very heart of a huge coal seam. They lifted it to the surface and tried to open it. There was putty in the joints. Under the influence of the sun's rays, it seemed to melt, and the lid of the stone casket easily opened. It was a coffin filled to the brim with some kind of pinkish-blue liquid. In it rested the perfectly preserved body of a girl who was later nicknamed the Tisul Princess. She was dressed in a delicate white dress, and at her head was a small black box. A few days later, the delegation of scientists arrived at the coal mine. They shoveled the entire area and interrogated eyewitnesses, after which the elderly professor told the residents of the village of Rzhavchik, located not far from the excavation site, that the Sleeping Beauty was already 800 million years old, which means that Darwin's theory was not true. In addition, he said that the alien version was immediately rejected because research confirmed that the found deceased belonged to the human species. Nevertheless, it was not possible to decipher the composition of the fabric of the dress in which the princess was dressed. Perhaps it was influenced by that very pink-blue liquid, the components of which could not be identified either. After the visit of scientists, a note was published in the local newspaper that a marble sarcophagus with a Sleeping Beauty inside was discovered in the Tisul region. It also spoke about the estimated age of the deceased and that the ancient relic turned the whole story upside down, saying the level of civilization to which the girl belonged was clearly much higher than ours. Very soon the military arrived in the village of Rzhavchik and confiscated a number with a note from the citizens, and all because some people were unhappy that information about the Tisul Princess was kept silent. The fighters for the truce went to various authorities and even wrote a letter to the Cathedral Committee of the CPSU. A year later, one of the most active participants in the struggle died suddenly. Perhaps it was a coincidence, but within a year, one after another, all 6 discoverers of the sarcophagus died in car accidents. Everyone else, in order to avoid trouble, no longer tried to get to the bottom of the truth. There was no more information about the Tisul Princess. The strange thing is that for some reason the information that was classified more than a half-century ago is still a secret. Maybe scientists are just too lazy to rewrite textbooks on history and biology. Ming Dynasty mummy. The Chinese pyramids are, as it were, considered another symbol of the antiquity of the Great Chinese civilization, along with the Great Wall with loopholes facing south. In China, there are even pyramids larger than Cheops. The first, already fairly eroded, 300 meters high, was filmed in 1945 by US Air Force pilot James Cosman. In the following years, the world saw striped pyramids not so long ago planted with forests. Most of the pyramids have been discovered already in the era of the internet and Google Earth. Most of them were not planted with forests, so many of them spread out pretty close to the terrain. Several times the opening of these pyramids was shown with and without people. Sometimes they fell under roadworks. There are broken dishes inside one pyramid. In another, concrete sarcophaguses were found. In the concrete sarcophaguses of the mummy, not as old as in Egypt, the woman's body wrapped in a thick cotton cloth was almost untouched by decay. Her clothes and shoes were perfectly preserved. On the mummy's finger there was a massive ring with jade. But the most amazing thing is her shoes. It has a very beautiful sewn machine stitching. This once again proves the great deception of Chinese culture. The Chinese still continue to create history before our eyes, but why they do it remains a mystery. 9,000 years. In 1974, while laying a road on the outskirts of Amman, the capital of Jordan, builders stumbled upon the remains of an ancient settlement. Archaeologists named it Ein Gazelle, source of the gazelle, after the name of a nearby village, and dated it to 7-8 millennia BC, identifying it as one of the most ancient places of human settlement. Ein Gazelle became famous for the unusual anthropomorphic statues found in pits near buildings that are believed to have performed ritual functions of ancestor worship. A total of 33 figures were found in 2 caches. The found statues are now in Jordanian museums except for 2. One is shown in Abu Dhabi, the other was transferred to a temporary exhibition at the Louvre. The statues are human figures sculpted from lime plaster applied to a base of type branches. Obtaining a plastic, solidifying mass from burnt natural alabaster is one of the oldest technologies mastered by a man, and Jordanian statues are an excellent example of its use. The statues have large heads and elongated necks. The legs are massive to give the figures stability, but the arms are often missing. Some statues have 6 toes and 4 to 7 fingers, and 3 have 2 heads. Many have traces of paint, including red and black stripes, possibly representing clothing items. Ancient sculptors paid special attention to the eyes of the statues. To make them, cowrie shells were used, inserted into the front of the sculpture and then partially coated with plastic. The contours of the eyes were emphasized. The pupils were drawn with black bitumen. In order not to miss the next video, I strongly recommend that you subscribe to the channel and click on the bell. And do not forget to leave a good comment, it also helps in the development of the channel. Thanks for your views, bye everyone!